Hello, this is the video that I'm going to be recording and sending to you. The lesson that I decided to teach today is on power on stalls. So the objective of, well, the scenario that I chose for this particular lesson was that I would be introducing the power on stall to newer students that didn't understand really what a stall was, or why we do that, or what the dangers of stalling is, or how a stall happens. And so I would basically be walking them through that recognition, or that learning process on being able to understand what a stall really is, and first of all, how to avoid it, and when you need to be very careful of when to avoid it, like when you're taking off or when you're coming into land, when you're close to the ground, and then to also be comfortable with the recovery procedure if they inadvertently find themselves in a stall. So that's the scenario for the lesson. So today since we're going to be talking about power on stalls, I will first establish what is a stall. Okay, I wrote it out on the board here. Now, a stall is loss of lift that is required to maintain flight due to separation of the airflow over the top part of the wing. With that loss of lift, the plane can no longer maintain flight. So stalling can be very dangerous because when the plane is in a stalled condition, it will fall. So this can happen at any airspeed, in any attitude, and any power setting. So with regards to stalls, it's important that we understand, first of all, how a stall occurs so that then we can avoid it. And if we do inadvertently find ourselves in a stall, how to recover from that. Okay? So the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, if a stall is due to separation of airflow over the top, how does that happen? How does a stall happen? So to demonstrate this, I drew an airfoil so that we could understand just kind of the basics of how a stall occurs. So here we have an airfoil with a leading edge and a trailing edge. And now if you were to draw a line from the leading edge to the trailing edge, that is called the chord line. Okay? Now, when we take, I drew another airfoil here to demonstrate. It's maybe perhaps a little exaggerated, but if we were to take the angle of that chord line to the relative wind that we have here, that is called our angle of attack. So we can have a positive angle of attack, we can have a negative angle of attack. Our angle of attack is the chord line, the angle of the chord line to the relative wind. Okay? So now, say we were beginning to pitch up, okay? If we were to continue to pitch up, we would eventually reach a point where the airflow, the relative air, doesn't flow over the top, actually begins to separate from the top part of the wing, which causes a loss of lift, okay? This initially starts as a vibration of the plane. As soon as that airflow starts separating, it begins to buffet, okay? That's called an incipient stall, okay? Now, if we were to continue in that attitude, it would eventually become fully developed, okay? So the point at which that separation occurs is when we go beyond what's called the critical angle of attack. If we go beyond the critical angle of attack, a stall will occur, any airspeed, any power setting, okay? So with regards to the critical angle of attack, that is the most important factor, and that is actually why planes stall, is when the angle of attack of the airplane goes beyond the critical angle of attack. Okay. So now, with regards to stalls, the most dangerous place for a stall to occur is low to the ground. The reason being for this is that if you were to inadvertently stall the airplane close to the ground, you may not have enough altitude to be able to recover from the stall. So with regards to that, there's two different types of stalls that the FAA requires that we practice. And the first is a power on stall. simulating taking off and stalling on upwind. And the second is a power off stall, which is simulating coming into land. So we'll talk about the power off stall in a later brief. For now, we're going to focus on the power on stall. Okay? So, as is indicated by the name, this is simulated by being in the takeoff configuration, first of all, and you're at full power, and this is simulating going beyond that critical angle of attack and stalling on upwind. Okay? So, while we're practicing this, we will go up to altitude. According to the ACS, it says that we need to be at least 1500 AGL, or 3000 AGL if you're in a multi-engine. And that's where we'll spend, it will probably be even higher than 1500 AGL, honestly, but that's where we'll practice these stalls. We'll practice them up at altitude so that we have plenty of altitude to be able to recover, so that it's safe altitude to practice these maneuvers, okay? So as far as the maneuver is concerned, as far as the procedure goes, there is a specific procedure for each airplane and also per each flight school. So, but generally speaking, what you would do is to execute a power on stall, you would be up at altitude, you would do your pre-maneuver checklist, you would do your clearing turn, so you would clear first to the left and then to the right, or do a 180 to clear the area, make sure that there's no traffic around. We'd make a radio call as appropriate. Once we knew that the area was clear, we could then begin the maneuver, which invariably begins by making sure that the plane is in the takeoff configuration, which for an archer, which is where I did most of my training in, is flaps 0. And then what we would do is you would bring your power back, no less than 65% is what the ACS says. So you bring your power back and you maintain an altitude. As you're maintaining an altitude, because you have less power, you're going to slow down. Okay? As you slow down, you would continue to slow down until you get to your rotation speed, which for the Archer was 60 knots. This is simulating like being on the runway, getting to your rotate speed, and then, as far as the procedure is concerned, at your rotate speed, you would then add full power and begin smoothly pitching up till you go beyond the critical angle of attack. And you'll first get usually you'll get a stall horn, then a buffet, and then you will actually go into a fully developed stall the plane, and then you'll recover. So we'll talk about the recovery procedure in just a minute. But first, as you reach your rotation speed and you add full power, there's two factors that we need to understand as far as the safe execution of this maneuver. The first thing is that while you're executing this maneuver, you need to maintain plus or minus 10 degrees heading if you're doing just a straight stall, or if you're doing a turning stall, you'd have to maintain within plus or minus 10 degrees angle of bank of what the examiner specified not to exceed 20 degrees. So with regards to that, there are two additional factors that we need to talk about. As you add full power and as you pitch up, the plane will experience what we call left turning tendencies. These can be broken apart into two factors. The first is going to be P factor, and the second is going to be torque factor. So, and there it goes, falling off. Hang on. So P factor, because of the angle of the blade as it descends, as the propeller is spinning around, the descending blade is taking a bigger chunk of air. It's taking a bigger bite out of the air. And therefore, that descending blade is generating more thrust. Now, because the right side is generating more thrust, that will yaw the plane to the left. And that's what P factor is. And that is accentuated as we increase our angle of attack relative to the wind. The P factor actually increases. So when you're doing it in the context of a power on stall, as you're adding full power and pitching up, that P factor is actually going to increase. That yawing tendency towards the left is going to get bigger and bigger as you pitch up and as you add the power. Okay? Now the solution to dealing with this and to staying coordinated through this maneuver is by applying right rudder. Okay? So that's P factor. The other factor that the other left turning tendency that we have to be aware of while executing this maneuver is called torque factor. Okay? So according to Newton's laws, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So in the context of this maneuver and in the context of a plane, the engine, which is indicated by this green, is pushing the drive shaft and the propeller one direction. It's pushing it, it's rotating it, it's spinning it. Okay, it's exerting a force on the drive shaft and on the propeller. Now, for that action of moving the propeller like that, the propeller and the drive shaft are actually exerting a force that is equal to the force that the engine is putting on it in the opposite direction. Now we can see what happens then when we're in the air is that when we start experiencing those high powers, that high power setting, the torque factor actually increases, which tends to roll the plane to the left. So the propeller is spinning this way, but it's exerting a force on the plane this way. And this is indicated by these arrows here. So once again, with P factor, it's a yawing tendency, but with this torque factor, it's actually a rolling tendency. But luckily, the solution to this torque factor that we're talking about now, is also right rudder. So the trick and the key to executing this maneuver safely is that as you're adding full power and smoothly pitching up, you are also going to add right rudder at the same time, so that you maintain coordination and so that you are counteracting those left turning tendencies and maintaining that plus or minus 10 degrees that the ACS calls for. Okay? So now that we've talked about those left turning tendencies as you begin to pitch up, as far as the execution of the maneuver goes, you will announce the stall horn. You'll start to get a vibration, that's the buffet, and you'll announce the buffet. You'll say, okay, so there's the stall horn, there's the buffet, and you will continue adding that back pressure until you get to a fully developed stall. If you're coordinated, what will happen is that the nose will drop. When you stall, when it's a fully developed stall, you've lost lift, the plane can no longer maintain flight, and the nose pitches down. Now, before you get too alarmed, here's kind of the cool thing about that, okay? If you're coordinated, the nose will drop and it will point down. Coming back to this original principle of the reason why we stall is by going beyond that critical angle of attack, the solution, the ultimate solution, is to reduce that angle of attack. And that actually happens naturally after a stall if you're coordinated. If you're coordinated, that nose will drop right down, and with that nose pointed down, your airspeed will begin to increase. As that airspeed increases, that causes airflow over the airfoils, which breaks the stall, and now we have control again of the aircraft. So now a common error, unfortunately though, after that happens, is to keep pulling, the nose drop, so an inexperienced student will keep pulling back on that yoke to try to get the plane to go back up again, and what will happen is that he'll stall the plane again. It's called a secondary stall, by maintaining that back pressure. When in reality, for the recovery phase to truly be effective, you have to let go of that back pressure. You release it. As soon as that nose drops, you release that back pressure. You let the nose go below the horizon. About 5 degrees below the horizon is good, until you pick up enough airspeed to where you can then add just a little bit of back pressure to bring that nose, that cowling, up to the horizon. Now you're not going to go beyond the horizon, just hold it at the horizon as you make sure you're full power still. And what will happen is if you hold that cowling at the horizon, your airspeed will eventually begin to pick up, and you'll get farther and farther. You'll be reducing your angle of attack more and more, and your airspeed will be getting faster. You're getting farther away from that stall speed until you're fully recovered. And then you can continue on with your flight. So as far as that recovery phase is concerned, the most important thing is maintain coordination. If you have a wing drop, okay, it's important not to use your ailerons to try to correct that wing drop. Use your rudder to correct that. That goes into spin awareness, which is an entirely different lesson, an additional lesson altogether. So with regards to that power on stall, that is the procedure. Those are the ACS standards. Okay? So if you're doing, well, one last note is that as far as the ACS is concerned, if you're just doing a straight stall, you have to maintain plus or minus 10 degrees on your heading, okay? But they can ask you to do a turning stall, which simulates like you're turning crosswind in a traffic pattern. Now this is very common, actually. It's a very common place for stalls to occur. They'll pitch up too much. They're not looking at their airspeed. They're looking over to the left, see if they're clear of traffic, and they don't realize that they're pulling back too much. Their airspeed's slowing down, and then they find themselves in a stall and they're at an angle of bank. So the examiner wants to see that you know how to recover from a turning stall. So with that, we maintain ailerons neutral so that we have symmetric lift over the wings. And once again, this kind of touches into that spin awareness. And there it goes, dropping again. So if you do experience a wing drop, or if you're in a turning stall when this happens, the correct way to recover from that is to, yes, release the back pressure, just like you would with a normal stall, but then to level your wings using rudder while maintaining ailerons neutral so that you don't inadvertently put yourself into a spin. So with regards to the power on stall, that is the complete procedure. And now you kind of understand the basics of how a stall occurs and how to perform the procedure, why we practice the procedure, and then also the recovery procedure that we'll drill to help you get to the point where recovery from a stall is automatic. You'll get used to stalling, you'll do it all the time, you'll be very comfortable with it. And with that comes experience, and with that comes knowledge, and with that comes the ability and safety that comes from being a knowledgeable pilot. And that's why we practice those power on stalls.